think addiction is a disease.
I think addiction can be overcome.
You have choices, and you can choose to stop. It's not a disease.
It is a disease, but it doesn't need medication to be treated.
Of course it is a disease.
Just experience working in a professional capacity with addicts. I think it's a disease.
Have you ever heard that people say addiction is a disease?
I've heard a few people say it, but it isn't, because you can stop whenever you want.
So who's right? Is an addiction a disease, or is it something you overcome with your force of will?
The eyes of night.
Hey, everybody, it's Loveline. I'm Adam Carolla. That is Dr. Drew. Phone number 1-800-LOVE-191. Bill Nye, the science guy, in here. Jameson?
Yes.
You're 16?
Yes.
What's up?
Lately, I've been having these dreams of, like, me smoking pot, and I've been clean for 3 months now.
Well, using dreams are absolutely routine. Anyone who's been addicted to a drug and stops will have using dreams. It's your brain really craving the drug. That's the feeling you have. You want to be using. You want it so badly. It doesn't sound like you're in a program, because if you were, people would tell you that everyone has that.
Well, I was in the program, and I didn't really bring it up. It just started recently about.
All right, well, tell your sponsor about it then.
I don't have a sponsor.
All right, like I said, you're not in the program.
We'll take ourselves a little break. We'll be back.
So, Drew, you do this radio show, Loveline, every night. It takes you just a few moments to analyze people's problems, and you seem to be dead on. What is it about addicts? What is it about addiction that you pick up on?
How do I know it's addiction?
Yeah.
It's just, it's like almost like a smell. Like
We're on the radio.
I know, and I'll go to Adam, I'll just go, I smell it. I just know it's here.
Youth is a happy time and a carefree time. A time of auto rides and double dates. It's a time of fun, of pranks and jokes. Youth is a time for finding one's place in the world. But sometimes in these troubled days, the very thoughtlessness of youth has led to a living nightmare. Addiction to drugs, too often acquired with tragic carelessness. To these addicts, life's only work is to find money for drugs. In their desperation, no means is too foul. Their only goal in life is to keep the deadening chemicals forever in their heart's blood.
It is important for me to, for people in this country particularly, to understand this disease of addiction, because the perception is so far from the reality. It breaks my heart, the amount of suffering and the amount of loss that goes on because of this disease.
When Dr. Drew's not working the phones on Loveline, he's the director of chemical dependency services at Los Encinas Hospital, where he works with hundreds of addicts.
And I want to hear how that, again, was or was not or relatable to your stories.
I smoked pot with thousands of kids in my high school. I ended up homeless and toothless on heroin.
Through this drug that I got introduced to, it was like through cocaine, and couldn't get the cocaine and moved on to speed. I became this like superwoman, and I was just like everything and anything.
And every time I got pregnant like that, I stopped taking drugs, I stopped doing alcohol, I stopped everything. Then after your child is a year or two old, just naturally you start using again.
Since I accepted the idea that addiction was a disease, it's been relatively easier for me to deal with my addiction.
Drew, in your opinion, addiction is a disease, right?
Addiction is a disease, but really to answer that question accurately, you've got to be able to understand what a disease is. Definite disease for me would be an abnormal physiologic process brought on by a relationship between the genetics of the individual and the environment. That pathophysiology will create a set of signs and symptoms that progress in a predictable way. We call it natural history.
Natural history.
And by affecting the natural history, we can create a predictable response to treatment. That's it. That's disease. And addiction does fit that. But people get hung up on where the physiology goes wrong. They don't understand that it's a brain disease.
Now, Dr. Drew went through that pretty fast. Let's go over it again. So what is a disease? Well, it's an abnormal physiological process. Something is going wrong inside you. A virus is replicating, a tumor is growing, or your brain is being altered by steady drug use. Now, diseases are brought on by the combination of the environment and genetics. So you've inhaled a flu virus and you've gotten infected, that's the environment. You're colorblind? Well, that's genetics. Now, diseases all have signs and symptoms. They all have natural histories, and they all respond to treatments in predictable ways. So to see why we often think of addiction as a disease, we have to take a look at how our brains work. Like everything else inside you, your brain is made of cells, billions of them. We call them neurons. Now, messages are carried from neuron to neuron with tiny chemical signals across gaps we call synapses. Now, at this chemical level, everything we find pleasurable amounts to nothing more than a microscopic flood of the neurotransmitter called dopamine. So we call this the reward pathway. We like the pleasurable feeling, so we do it again and again, do it again and again. Things like eating, drinking, and having sex are pleasurable because they're required for our survival. But it turns out there's a connection between drugs and dopamine.
Wow! These coca leaves are really raising the level of dopamine at the synapses in my brain. Yeah, you know, it's like it's almost mimicking the neurotransmitter structure by tying up to binding sites in the molecules that transport dopamine.
I've heard that to get high, they have to occupy at least 47% of those sites.
Really? I heard it was 60 to 80%.
Well, sure, 60 to 80% for maximum effect, but 47% at the minimum.
Well, I don't want to get high. I just want to get through the cold temperatures at night.
The cold doesn't bother me.
Really? So, why are you chewing on these?
Because my dad never played catch with me. I think I'm going to need a hug here.
No, dude.
Down in here, down in this sort of reptilian part of your brain, we share that with mice and rats and other certainly lower mammals. And it's why addiction is so easily studied in rodents and lower mammalian life forms, because this is a disease of this part of the brain, of an area called the mesolimbic reward system. And it's a part of the brain that does not have language, does not have logic. It's basically the drive center. It's the survival center of your brain. Addiction is basically a hijacking of the survival system.
To show the powerful effect that drugs can have on the survival system, an experiment was done with laboratory mice. Now, these were special mice. They were already alcoholic mice, and they were given access to all the cocaine they wanted every time they pressed a lever. So the mice would maintain a precise concentration of cocaine in their bodies, pressing a lever every 12 minutes. Exactly. After 14 days, the mice died. Powerful stuff.